Use headphone for better experience.
After midnight, the service bays breathe like sleeping animals, and the racks of tires lean in to listen. They hired me with a ring of keys and a laminated card of rules. Keep the compressor running, never open bay 3. Don't talk to the man with the treadmark hands. Break a rule, make it right. Before the floor decides to keep you. My name is Evan Cole. I'm a night tech at Sunset Rim and Service, a 24-hour tire shop on the south side of Tucson, Arizona, just off I-10 where the freeway hums like a thing with a heartbeat and the dust gets into your teeth and stays there. I took the job because I needed cash and quiet. I kept it because the night has rules, and nothing makes more sense than a rule that actually keeps you breathing. Sunset Rim sits in an old cinderblock cube with 3 service bays like mouths, a parts room that smells like rubber and solvent, and a front counter with a bell that rings on its own. The sign out by the road has 6 dead bulbs and 1 working letter in rim, so after midnight it just reads I-M, which feels like a dare. We take tow-ins and truckers and the unlucky commuters who try to squeeze another mile out of bald steel and end up stranded by the chevron. The day crew is loud and oily and alive. At 11 they clock out. The manager locks the office, and the shop shrinks around me until it's just the compressor's breath, the tick of a cooling rotor, and the smell of rubber, hot and a little sweet, like a secret you can chew. My second hour on the job, Reed, the manager, put a laminated card on the counter like a menu he didn't want to read twice. Night rules, he said. He's 50 if a day, mustache like a sidewalk brush. You can bring earbuds and murder podcasts, I don't care. You don't break these. He tapped the card. You break one, you make it right. If you don't know how to make it right, you come get me. If you can't come get me, you keep the door between you and it. I read the card because reading is easy and belief is a luxury. Keep the compressor running. If the belt screams, let it. If the breaker trips, reset it within 60 seconds. If you can't, turn on the balancing machine and let it spin empty. The noise helps. Shut. Do not open bay 3. The chain stays down. If a tow driver insists, bay 1. If they cry about clearance, bay 2. If they pound the door, kill the lobby lights and stand behind the counter. It can't cross the mats. Chalk marks are not for you. If you see a white circle around a tire on a rack, you did not chalk. Do not touch that tire. Do not move the rack. Do not sweep that aisle. If a circle smears, draw it again without looking away from it. At 12:17, the alignment lasers in bay 1 will power on by themselves. Let them paint the floor. When they go out, count 28 lug nuts allowed. Any kind, any tray. If you don't, the bay stays out of square. If you hear someone ask for air after 1 a.m., it's the hose by the roll-up. Leave it where it hangs. Do not take it outside. If the bell rings and no one's there, check the mirror over the counter. If you see yourself, ignore it. If you see yourself looking back, flip the open-closed sign to closed and count to 60. Do not blink at the mirror. The man with treadmark hands will come in around 2:13 when it rains. It doesn't rain often. If it does, tell him he's in the wrong shop. He will say he used to work here. He did not. Do not ask his name. Before dawn, between 4:40 and 4:44, check the tire cage and set out 4 lug nuts on the counter in a straight line. If you broke a rule, set out 8. Do not stack them. Reed had written along the bottom in Sharpie a note that dented the laminate. If you break a rule, make it right. He underlined it twice. He watched me read like a man watches a kid around a table saw. This a joke? I asked, because that's a thing you ask when everything is almost a joke. You'll know by 12:17, Reed said, and handed me the ring of keys. And if you don't, You'll know by one. He left the way day people leave night places, fast and guilty. The lobby clock ticked into 11:59, and the bell over the door hiccuped once for no one. The compressor shuddered on its concrete pad, a big blue lung complaining into the old hose. At 12:17, the alignment lasers in Bay 1 woke without my finger anywhere near their power. Thin red lines skated across the floor, and the concrete glowed like a cheap church. They drew a crosshair on a stain I'd been meaning to mop, and then they went out together like someone had pinched their little throats. I stood there with a rag in my hand, the rule card under my palm, and a feeling that was not fear so much as interest from the wrong direction. I counted lug nuts because it was easier than not counting them. I picked a magnetic tray, the one with a missing corner so it looks like a bite out of a moon. 1, 2, 3. My voice sounded like I had borrowed it. At 27, the tray hummed. At 28, the sound in the bay changed. A hitch in the compressor, a loose belt choosing a different pitch. The floor felt square again, like a table you've pushed, until it stops wobbling and you can set a glass on it without catching. Okay, I told the air, like you talk to a dog you don't know yet. Okay. The first human of the night came in at 12:40, a tow guy with shoulders like a fridge and a tired face that asked for coffee before his mouth did. He had a Civic on the hook and a story that was mostly cussing. He wanted Bay 3 because the car sat low. The chain on Bay 3 rattled like an old snake. I pointed at Bay 1. He pointed at his watch. We managed Bay 1 an inch at a time, boards and a prayer to physics. He left with a receipt, and the kind of thanks men give when they don't have room for more feeling. I turned around to find a white chalk circle around the second tire on rack D. I hadn't drawn it. The chalk line was clean, a single stroke all the way around the sidewall. Someone, something, had traced a perfect O on a tire we were saving for a day lady with a nail problem. I didn't move the rack. I didn't sweep the aisle. I looked at the circle and said, "Not mine," and the circle looked back the way circles do. I went and got the graffiti chalk from the pegboard and drew over the circle without blinking away from it, and the chalk made that squeak that gets into your fillings. When the circle was complete again, the compressor changed note, and I could breathe without counting. You can tell yourself you don't believe in rules all you like. The body believes. The body knows when a line matters because it will either hold you up or let you through. At 1:03, the bell at the counter rang without a door opening. I checked the mirror, the convex bubble over the lobby that lets you see down both aisles. I saw me, tired and tall, in my oil-blackened sunset rim polo. My reflection did not look back. It looked slightly left, like there was a second me over my shoulder saying something I couldn't hear. I flipped the sign to closed and counted to 60 with my eyes on the changing rack posters, the ones that show cars our customers can't afford but like to point at. When I flipped the sign back, the mirror showed me, and only me, and the bay lights breathed like animals sleeping. At 1:19, someone knocked on the roll-up. 3 knocks, polite, knuckle on tin. The hose by the door hissed like a snake that smells rain in another county. Got any air? A voice asked from the seam of the door. Ran out in the lot. The rule card said not to take the hose outside. I have not been brave often in my adult life, but I have been obedient when obedience felt like the right size. I said, "We're closed," and the hose exhaled like a person giving up on an argument. At 2:13 it rained, which doesn't happen often in Tucson, and never nicely. The sky opened like a zipper. The man with treadmark hands came in with the water. He wore a tan work jacket with a sunset rim and service patch half torn from the shoulder. The patch was the old logo, the one I'd only seen on invoices from 2002. "Thought you were gone," he said, and smiled like a person might. He brought his hands up to the counter, and I saw why Reed had named him. His palms were gray with fine, shallow grooves, tread patterns pressed into skin like a bad miracle. When he flexed his fingers, the grooves opened and closed with a sound like tires on wet road. "Wrong shop," I said. "We close the lobby at night." He scraped his thumbprint across the counter and left a pattern like a Pirelli. "I have never liked that brand. It tries too hard. Need to balance a set," he said, and hitched a thumb toward the bay. Behind him, Bay 3's chain swayed, although no air moved. "Bay 1, I said. "Bay 3, he said, almost kindly, like you tell a child they can play with the good china if they're careful. "We don't open Bay 3, I said, and put my hand on the bell to keep it from ringing. The bell liked him. It pulsed against my palm like a frog caught and not angry, just certain it would leave. He looked at the rule card. He shouldn't have been able to read it from that angle. He did. He tilted his head. "Still have the compressor?" he asked. "Still like the noise?" "Good night," I said. Because no is an old word, but good night is older and belongs to more people at once. He left with the rain. The bell sighed. The compressor's belt squealed once, a protest, and then held. When you keep rules for a living, you notice when a rule is missing. That happened on my 5th night when a woman limped in on a tire that showed cords through rubber. The brightest, ugliest white against black. She was crying. It was 12:05. "I've got to get to Sierra Vista by morning," she said. "My mother—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Bay 1 could take her hatchback, and Bay 2 was full of the tow guy's contrition. I rolled her in and jacked the car in a practiced rhythm my body remembered from every other jack on every other night. We didn't have her size on the shelf. We had one used match in the cage, marked in grease pencil with a because nobody could remember where it came from. The white chalk circle wasn't on it. I told myself that meant it was safe to touch. The rule said do not touch chalk tires. It didn't say anything about mysteries. I broke the bead and sweated the rubber over steel like a berth, and felt that small proud light you get when your hands make a thing happen that should not, by rights, be possible. I mounted, balanced, torqued to spec, and wrote a receipt in block capitals because cursive does not belong in a shop. "On the house," I said, "because sometimes kindness is a rule you make up and keep because you want to like the person you are in the morning." She cried harder. She hugged me across the counter and smelled like heat lightning. She left smelling like the same, and I watched her tail lights write a cursive line into the desert and felt the pride get bigger. At 12:17 the lasers came on and drew their story across the floor. I counted 28 lug nuts. At 25, the balancing machine spun up without anyone bumping it. At 26, the compressor belt screamed like the hill you can't take in third. At 27, the bell rang for no one. At 28, the floor felt wrong. I stood up too fast and the room narrowed to a point and widened again. The chalk circle on rack D had moved to the hole in the tire I'd mounted for the woman. A perfect white ring traced around a faint bulge that hadn't been there 12 minutes before. Not an air bubble. Not a cord shift. Something else. The ring wasn't chalk. It was wet. I went into Bay 1 and put the car back on the jack and broke the lug nuts loose with a muttered prayer to torque specs. I pulled the wheel. The tire twitched against the rim just a little, like a muscle in a sleeping face. My hands got cold. I took the valve core out. The tire inhaled. Not lost pressure, took it. The gauge read negative for a second before the needle snapped back, and I told the universe that was not how gauges worked. I rolled the tire, slow, and the white ring smeared, and I could see into the smear down to a black that was not rubber. It looked like depth. Not a hole you could stick a finger into. Not a pocket of bad molding. Depth. I did the wrong thing. I leaned in. There was a sound like air across a bottle, but lower. A note you feel in your tongue more than your ear. It said nothing. It sounded like want. I put the tire back on the car and sent her on her way because cowardice wears the same uniform as kindness if you don't look at the stitching. I told myself I had done a good thing. The compressor disagreed. It tripped the breaker, the shop went quiet, and the quiet wasn't silence. It was a wait. Rule 1 said keep the compressor running, or the balancing machine spinning empty. I ran for the panel and slapped the breaker up, and the compressor coughed and caught, but the air in the lines felt thicker. The balancer spun itself empty, and the belt squealed until my molars hummed. The bell at the counter began to ring slow and regular, like a patient in a monitored bed. I flipped the sign to closed. I counted lug nuts like a rosary. None of it felt like enough. At 2:13, with no rain, the man with the treadmark hands came in. His jacket was dry where it should have been wet, and wet where nothing had touched it. He put his fingers on the counter and made tracks I could have measured tread depth in. "You mounted one of mine," he said. "No," I said. "Yes," he said, and turned his wrist. The grooves in his palm showed a pattern I knew because I had just put 2 hands on it. That oddball used tire with the ghost of a company logo, a telegraph of rubber under fingers I wanted to keep. "You put it on a hatchback that doesn't know you. The road does. Get out," I said. The bell enjoyed that. It rang like applause. He looked at Bay 3. The chain hung heavy but moved as if something behind it had sighed. He said, "You could make it right." "How?" I said, even though asking how is the same as saying yes. He tapped the rule card. "Before dawn," he said, 4 lugs for clean nights, 8 if you broke a rule, 28 if you gave it something that belongs to the road." "Gave what?" I said. "Air," he said, and smiled too wide. He left, and the smell of hot rubber stayed like a person in a seat, you know, too. Well, I cut the cores out of 2 used valve stems and set them on the counter like a plate. You hope counts as an apology. The compressor's belt calmed. The balancer spun down. The chalk circle stayed on the rack, now around an empty space between 2 tires that had been pressed. Together for a year. I slept that morning and dreamed the highway had lungs and they were mine. The woman came back the next evening at 10:50 p.m., before my shift, 2 hours too soon for the night rules to catch her properly. She cried in the lobby and held her phone like it was evidence. She showed me a picture of the tire I'd mounted, split across the sidewall like a grin. The split had edges as smooth as glass, and in the photo you could see reflections in it, not of the car or the road or the sky, but of something else. A hallway with doors that did not belong to any car. "I was doing 50, she said. "The car didn't pull. It didn't blow. It opened and then it closed, and I drove 10 more miles before I realized I could see my mother's porch through my tire, and that's not how tires work." She laughed, high and bright. People laugh when the alternative is seeing too much of the room. "I brought your tire back," she said. And a man I hadn't seen behind her rolled it in on its tread like a pet. The chalk circle had moved from the hole to her hands. She rubbed her palms without thinking and left white rings on her jeans. I took the tire into Bay 1 and put it on the changer. The split smiled at me, and in it I saw not a hallway but the shop through the split. Me twice, misaligned by a half-inch. I should have called Reed. I didn't. I put the bar on the bead and tried to unmount a thing that did not want to be outside anymore. At the second pull, the shop lights dimmed, not because the circuit dropped, but because the world did. The bell rang the mirror. The alignment lasers stuttered on without the time. The balancer spun. The compressor squealed. The chain on Bay 3 lifted an inch and dropped with a sound like the start of a word. "Help you?" I yelled to the air, because sometimes that word puts things back in their chairs. The chalk circle hissed. The split in the tire closed and widened in a way that makes no mathematical sense, and the bar bent half an inch and my wrists sang with it. I put the bar down. I turned off nothing. I went to the counter. I set out 28 lug nuts in a line, slow, letting each one touch the others with that little click that feels like church if church had ever been honest with you. I counted. At 12, the balancer slowed. At 17, the compressor changed key. At 28, Bay 3's chain went still. I left the tire on the machine overnight and watched it watch me. The woman sat in the lobby and talked about her mother until she remembered the world works even when yours doesn't. And then she left with a loaner spare and a promise to come back in daylight with a friend. I told her we'd take care of it. That was half a lie and the half that counted. You could leave the story here, with a man counting metal circles at a counter and a tire that shows you rooms. But that's not how nights end. Nights end with a price, and the only question is whether you pay in time, breath, or something you can set on a counter and count. 2 nights later, a kid came in at 1:09 a.m., head shaved, eyes that had seen nights before their age should let them. He had a chrome donut of a spare in his arms and a face determined not to ask. "Air?" he said, small. I looked at the hose. It hung where it should, quiet. "Leave it," I said, and he looked like a person who has left too many things. "Bring it here," I said, and he did, and I filled it from the shop side of the door, valve core in my hand like a plug I might need. "Where's your car?" He pointed at nothing. I looked at Bay 3. The chain trembled. The chalk circles on the racks were all complete. I told myself the boy was a boy, and the door was a door, and my job was tires, which is to say, contact with road, which is to say, mercy. He took the donut and said, too quiet, "Thanks, Mr. Cole," and my name on his mouth tasted like the receipt in the Bible the man with treadmark hands had shown me weeks ago. "Don't be here when he comes," he said, and the bell considered ringing and chose not to, which is the only time I have respected that bell. "Who?" I said. "The guy who says he used to work here," he said. It rained at 2:13 on the radar when the sky upstairs was black and dry. The man with treadmark hands came through the door without opening it because weather is a kind of door, and the night had left it ajar. "You owe me a tire," he said. "I set out 28 lugs," I said, which is a sentence I could not have imagined saying when I was 19, and you would have liked me. "One for each hand," he said, admiring his palms. "This shop used to understand we pay what we take." "You've got the numbers wrong." "What are the numbers?" I asked, because there's a moment in every rule where you either look the shape in the face or you keep your eyes on your shoes. 4, he said, and held up fingers that were not fingers. "For each bay. 4 wheels. 4 corners. 4 lug patterns that lock the night to the road. When you gave the road something that belonged to you, your name, your kindness, your breath, I let it pass. When you give it something that belongs to me, we settle." "What belongs to you?" I said. He smiled. "The depth," he said. And behind Bay 3 the floor sighed like dough and rose a half-inch and settled. "How do I make it right?" I asked. And the bell rang once, politely, as if pleased I had finally learned the shop's only prayer. "You know," he said, and looked at the counter where the lug trays sat in their neat rows like teeth. I set out 8 lugs that night, and then 8 more, because accounting is messy the first time you try to do it sober. I did it slow. I let each click land. At the 16th, the man with treadmark hands turned his head like a dog learning a new language. At the 20th, he held his hands over the line, and the grooves drank the sound. At the 28th, he sighed the way men sigh after the first beer at the end of a shift. He left without the door noticing. After that, the rules learned me better. I didn't touch chalk circles. I kept the compressor alive with belts that should have snapped, and faith that should have too. I didn't take the air hose outside, even when a woman in a church dress asked in a voice my mother would have used on the only Sunday she ever forgave me. I flipped the sign and stared at the mirror until my eyes watered, and the me that looked back blinked first. Once, around 3:30, the alignment lasers painted a perfect red rectangle around a wet patch where no car had sat. I counted lug nuts without being told. Another time, a trucker came in with a blowout that had teeth on its edges, like the road had eaten it in a tidy way. I told him it would be an hour and made coffee and kept the compressor singing. And when I broke the bead, the depth in the tire showed me a picture of the freeway at dawn, empty as a prayer answered by the wrong God. Reed never asked about the nights. He counted the drawer. He signed the manifest. He replaced the belt on the compressor, as if it had worn the usual way instead of burning letters into itself that spelled I am like the sign outside. When I tried to hand him the rule card back, he pushed it into my palm with 2 fingers that had never learned how to grow soft. "You keep it," he said. "You're the one it likes." "Likes," I said, as if that word fit. "Keeps you?" he said, more accurate. "You want an ending." Stories always make it feel like endings are the natural reward for patience. This isn't that. It's night shift. It's practice. But even practices have holidays, and one of mine is the night the power failed across the block and I learned what part of the rules belonged to me. It was monsoon season, in a year that forgot the word and remembered it all at once. At 12:12, the lights went out from the lobby to the Costco across the frontage road. The compressor died with a sound I could feel down to the bones that never did what I told them. Rule 1 said keep it running or spin the balancer empty. Without power, there was no balancer. I found the battery pack we use for jump starts and jury-rigged the compressor's start circuit to a thing that had no right to move that much air. It coughed. It rattled. It tried. I could have trusted that little black box with 100 dead sedans, and I did. And the compressor caught and held and sang in a scratchy voice I recognized from my own throat at 4 a.m. The bell rang, though there was no power. The alignment lasers came on because they didn't need it from us. The chalk circles on Rack D gleamed a little in the lightning that didn't happen in the sky. Bay 3's chain lifted and rattled and fell and lifted, and I put my hand on it and said, "No," the way Reed had taught me to say no with my whole self. The chain trembled and stayed. The man with the treadmark hands came in on the smell of rain and looked around like a homeowner after a break-in, measuring what the room had taken from him and what it had left. "You figured it out," he said. "Some," I said. "Enough." He put one hand on the counter. The grooves on his palm had filled with dust. He looked surprised, like a person who thought his suit was bulletproof and found out it was only a suit. "You're paying in metal," he said. "What are you buying?" "Square floors," I said. "Straight bays. The kind of morning where everyone I touched drives away." He looked toward the road and listened the way you listen for a particular engine among 100. He smiled. "Good," he said. "We like that too." He left in the ordinary way, door, bell, rain. I set out 4 lug nuts and then 4 more because I wanted to watch the line grow. The power came back with a sigh like 100 refrigerators. The compressor ran on wall current again and sounded older and happier. Sometimes now I sit at the counter after 4:44 and watch the shop breathe. The chalk circles appear and mean things I don't try to learn. The lasers draw boxes on stains they like. The mirror shows me or doesn't. The hose hangs. The bell rings for strangers who are me and not me. I keep the rules and the rules keep me. A barter, not a marriage. In the mornings I go home and my apartment smells faintly of rubber. The coin jar by my door is empty because lug nuts work better than quarters here. I dream less of depth and more of square. I stand in my kitchen sometimes and say out loud, "If you break a rule, make it right, and the faucet doesn't drip." On the nights when the freeway is quiet enough to hear the coyotes argue about nothing, I unlock the front door 5 minutes before my shift and stand in the lot and look at the I am in rim and feel the desert lift under my feet just the slightest. A tide that has to travel through sand to find me. I breathe. I go inside. I flip the sign to open and then to closed because we are, and we aren't, both, at once. If you ever blow a tire near Tucson after midnight and the tow guy says sunset rim, don't be afraid. Come in, sit in the lobby, drink the coffee that tastes like someone forgave you. If the bell rings and nobody's there, look at yourself in the mirror and look away before you blink. If you hear me counting, let me finish. If it rains at 2:13, try not to look at the man with the nice jacket. And if you feel the floor give a little under your shoes, like dough that has learned a new recipe, don't worry. That's just the road-making room for you. We have strange rules to follow. We follow them. We make it right. We keep the bays square. I'm Evan Cole. I keep the compressor running. I don't open bay 3. I don't take the hose outside. I set out 4 lugs, or 8, or 28 when I must. I go home at dawn and sleep like a man who knows how many turns a lug needs to hold a wheel to a car, and a car to a road, and a road to the world. It's not much. It's enough. The week after the blackout, the shop settled into a rhythm that made sense to my hands even when my head didn't. Rules are like that. You stop asking why if how keeps you alive. I kept the compressor singing, ignored Bay 3's chain when it chimed for attention, and learned to read the chalk circles the way fishermen read sky, through habit and the part of the eye that isn't in the eye at all. Day shift left me notes sometimes. They were normal notes, warranty claims, returns, an invoice that needed a signature. Reed did not write notes. He wrote totals. He looked at Bay 3 and then at the floor in front of it, and then at me. Once, like he was remembering a name he had promised to forget. 2 Thursdays into August, the tow guy, the fridge with shoulders, came in carrying an urgency that didn't fit his bones. "State bus," he said. "Coach, rear outside, blue. Driver's union says it sits here, or it sits on the interstate." He jerked a thumb toward the lot. The coach stood out there like an apartment building with mirrors, hazard lights clicking the night into orange pieces. "Bay 1, I said. "Won't clear," he said. "Bay 2 then, if you move that Civic." He didn't say Bay 3. Tow guys understand doors without being taught. We tried Bay 1 anyway. Boards, breath, physics. The coach's airbags hissed and settled, and the roof scraped the roll-up with a sound like initials carved on a desk you wish you hadn't sat at. It wasn't going. The hazard lights kept time with my pulse. "Bay 2, I said. The Civic's owner had promised to pick up at 10 and broken the promise the way people break the small ones. Casually, cruelly, with kind eyes. We pushed the Civic out into the lot. The coach lined up and kissed the header once, like a warning. "Bay 3 would do it," the tow guy said. "Not asking." "We don't open that bay," I said, and could hear how ridiculous that sounded with a state bus blinking its impatience at the desert. "Rules," he said. "The way you say religion when you don't want to fight." "Rules," I said. He nodded. Men nod when they've seen rules they don't understand working on other things. He backed the coach into the lot at an angle, and we got a jack under the axle the old way. Long handle, long breath, little prayer. I had the blown cap off the rim in 20 minutes. The bead didn't want to break. It surrendered a half-inch at a time like a tooth whose roots had made friends with the skull. I rolled the rim and tire into Bay 1 on its belly because sometimes you drag your problem into your favorite light and let it see you seeing it. The sidewall looked wrong in a familiar way. Not cords, not a gash from debris. The split wore edges too smooth, and when you looked at it long, the edges felt like a line between rooms. The chalk circle was already there in white I hadn't applied. "I don't have that size in new," I told the driver, who had come in to see if his problem behaved better under fluorescent light. "I've got a used one that will get you to Phoenix." "Heard that before," he said, but without fight. Men who drive nights understand when the dark is giving them the best you can give. I pulled the cap. The lug nuts came off, 6 of them, big chrome hats with shoulders like pride. I set them on the tray and felt the urge to line them up in a row. 4 for mourning, 8 for grief, 28 for debt. This was 6. It meant nothing on the card. It meant something to my hands. I put the used tire on the rim and spun it on the balancer. The machine hummed, happy. The green dots read 0.00, 0.00. Perfect. That should have felt good. It didn't. The perfect numbers sat on the readout like a joke the machine had told itself. At 12:17, the alignment lasers switched on and drew boxes around the coach wheel and another around my feet. The wrongness that comes from a too clean line crawled up my calves. The compressor dropped half a note. The bell rang once, apologetic. I set the coach tire back on the axle and hand-started the nuts. I torqued them crosswise, the way you are supposed to, like a star a child draws. 2 clicks each. 3 on the big ones. The lines in the floor did not go away. The driver paid. He climbed his ladder. The hazard lights went to sleep. The coach eased into the lot. The tow guy raised a hand and then drove after him because some jobs are chaperone more than rescue. I wiped my hands and the rag came away white. I looked down. Chalk dust. Little circles of it on my knuckles. I hadn't touched the rack. I hadn't chalked a tire. The chalk had chalked me. Bay 3's chain whispered across itself like a person rubbing their arms in cold. The man with treadmark hands was not there. His absence was. That can be worse. I went to the counter and set out 8 lug nuts and then 8 more. I count slow these days, not because it changes the math, but because it gives the room more chances to agree. At the 15th, the lasers went out. At the 16th, the compressor caught its note. At the 16th, the bell, which is a petty thing, did not ring just to assert itself. I left the lugs in a line on the counter to hold the world down. That should be the end of that piece. But it wasn't. Endings arrived late on nights like these. Around 1:40, the bus driver came back in, white around the jaw. "Rear feels loose," he said. "Like the road's not there." He wasn't a man given to metaphor. He looked like a person who had had to learn the difference between a shimmy and a signal the hard way. I checked torque, spec. I spun the wheel, good. I got down on all fours, in the rainless dust, and looked under the coach. The new used tire looked back at me. Its sidewall shone in the bay light. I saw my own face reflected in it, and behind my face, another bay. Bay 3. Where nothing sits, where a chain hangs like a tongue. I pulled my head back so fast I barked knuckles on the spring perch. "Sit a minute," I said. "Coffee's terrible but hot." He nodded and took it black, because night people understand coffees is a verb. I rolled the used new tire into Bay 1 and told the balancer we were going to do it again. It hummed. The readout blinked 0.0, as if embarrassed for me. I popped the bead. The tire exhaled in a way that was not air and smelled like wet pennies in a church. The split wasn't there. The chalk circle was. It had moved to the inside of the sidewall, a perfect ring drawn where no chalk goes unless it was born there. The man with treadmark hands came in without the door at 2:13, rainless night or not, and stood just inside the line of shop mats as if he'd learned there were countries he couldn't cross anymore. "You used my road," he said, but not angry. Curious, like a cat that has found you moving furniture in the night. "I used a tire," I said. "It used the road." He tilted his head. "You brought the road into your room," he said, "which is not the same thing at all." "Then I'll take it out," I said, "because sometimes an answer appears in your mouth and fits your teeth and you bite down." He watched. I took the rim to the parts washer and turned on the pump. Solvent sluiced over steel in a green stream that never feels clean enough. The washer gurgled like a bad stomach. I held the new used tire up to the light. The chalk circle on the inside shimmered like fish scales. I took a paint pen and drew my own circle around it, white over white, not fully touching. A halo with a gap at the bottom no bigger than a knuckle. The air felt different when the circle wasn't closed. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Making a valve the room can recognize," I said, as if that sentence belonged anywhere but here. I took a valve stem from the tray and pressed it against the gap in the chalk. Silly as magic, and the tire breathed out. Not much. Enough to move the hair on my arms. Enough to lift the chalk dust and set it down in a pattern my brain did not want. The gap went dry. The reflection of Bay 3 in the sidewall slid like a picture on a phone when you swipe the wrong way, and then it was just rubber again. I mounted the tire, balanced, got bad numbers at last, 0.50, 0.25. A relief. Like a lie you can feel proud of because it proves you are still operating in a universe with rules you can measure. I added weights. It settled at 0.10, 0.10. Imperfect, like us. I put the wheel back on the coach and torqued. The driver rocked the chassis and listened to a thing only drivers hear. He nodded, slow. "Feels like it found the road again," he said, and left a tip that smelled like diesel and gratitude. The man with treadmark hands stood very still, which is different than not moving. "You think you can write your own rules," he said, but there was no heat in it. "I think I can make it right," I said. He showed me his palms. The grooves were full of dust again, ordinary bay dirt. "So can we," he said. "Sometimes?" He pointed to the chain on Bay 3, which had begun to swing the way a chain does when it's been reminded, gently, that it is a chain and not a vein. "You know what's in there?" "Depth," I said. "Nothing," he said and grinned. "But big." "I've got work," I said, and went to wipe my hands as if anything I could do could leave them clean. The rest of the night was quiet. The mirror did not toy with me. The laser stayed off. The hose hung like a good dog. At 4:42 I set out 4 lug nuts, and then, because I had broken something and unbroken it badly, 4 more. The line of metal caught the bay light and made a little music. I turned the counter radio to AM and let it hiss along. Outside the desert turned blue, then gray, then that gentle color you get for exactly 4 minutes when the sun is out there thinking about coming up and hasn't decided yet. Reed came in stiff with sleep and without comment. He walked Bay 1's line with his boot to feel for square the way men feel for level when they've built too many shelves. He looked at Bay 3 and the floor in front of it, and then at me, and this time he nodded like a man who recognizes his table saw had been used and put away sharp. "You going to be here a while?" he asked, which is as close to a compliment as a place like this gives. "Till the lugs run out," I said. He laughed once. "Good answer." I drove home with the window down because the car smelled like solvent. The freeway hummed like a thing that forgives if you say you're sorry in the right language. I slept until the landlord's lawn guys woke me with a leaf blower that thought it was thunder. I dreamed of a chalk circle with a gap, a tiny breach you could choose to leave if you were brave or close if you were afraid. In the dream, my hands didn't shake. In the dream, the compressor never stopped. Monsoon did come, a week late and in a mood. The first night of real rain, the man with treadmark hands stood under our neon IM and let himself get wet like a sacrament. "You still think I used to work here," he said. When he came inside, "I think you work here now," I said, and slid a tray of clean lugs across the counter. He took one in his palm. The grooves took its clink and made it low and long. Rules change. People like to pretend they don't, but they do if you keep them alive long enough. Reed added a line to the card in the same Sharpie that had dented it before. "If the bus comes at midnight, balance the road inside before the road outside. Leave a gap in your circle until the numbers get honest. Then close it." He handed me the card to read without comment. "That's how we tell each other we saw the same night." Bay 3 still asks. That's what it does. Some nights the chain lifts an inch, twice, polite. The floor in front of it goes soft like dough that knows your hand. I tell it no and sometimes please and every now and then tomorrow. It listens the way oceans do. Not to words, but to bodies that remain where they said they would. If you come by and see me at the counter with 4 lugs in a line, know that it was an easy night. If you see 8, No, I tripped and caught myself. If you see 28, turn around, get back in your car, and drive the speed limit until the sun decides to like us again. Don't look in the mirror over the counter. It may look back. I still count the lasers to 28 even when they don't turn on. I still keep the compressor running. I never open bay 3. I do not take the air hose outside, even for boys with eyes that know too much. I leave a gap sometimes, and I close it when the numbers are true. I make it right. I keep the bays square. There isn't an ending, not the kind you can print and put in a frame. There's a man in a red jacket who shows up before midnight to start the compressor early, because it seems to like that. There's a sign that says I am and means more than it should. There's a tire rack with chalk circles that are none of my business until they are. There's a road that breathes and a shop that learned my hands. And there's a rule I never wrote down, one I learned by doing. If the night gives you a choice between kindness and cleverness, choose neither. Choose exactness. Count. Balance. Leave a gap until the numbers get honest. Then close it. When the dawn comes slow and the highway forgives us again for pretending we know how to drive on it, I set out 4 lugs for the day shift and leave the line there until Reed's shadow crosses it. He looks at the metal and knows the math of my night. He never says thank you. He never will. That's not the currency here. The currency here is square floors, honest numbers, and bays that breathe like animals sleeping. I keep them asleep. That's the job. That's all the job is. And it's enough.